Welcome to Close of Business. I'm Alicia Barry. Next week's budget is placing a renewed spotlight on energy prices. With speculation, the government will extend its $300 household energy subsidy to keep prices down. Rooftop solar proponents say the money would be better spent on a federal subsidy program for household battery storage systems. Rihanna Whitson reports.
Rooftop solar's a common sight in our suburbs. Now massive cuts to solar feed-in tariffs are helping to fuel a batteries boom.
So in some instances, houses are getting 1 or 2 cents. Even in some scenarios, they're paying for power to export that to the grid.
This was the tipping point for Kevin Wynne. He used to get 15 cents for every kilowatt hour he exported to the grid. Now he gets 3 cents.
I think it's like a scam. That's the main reason I decided to install the battery.
4 million households and businesses have rooftop solar, but only about 1 in 12 or 320,000 have a battery. 75,000 units were installed in 2024. That's a 47% increase on the previous year.
Battery attachment rate now.
Installation companies say inquiries have soared since regulated power price rises were announced.
They're thinking about getting a solar system to be more independent and to be independent from the volatility of the pricing.
The average so-called payback time for a rooftop solar system with a battery is about 8 years, but can still be more than a decade without subsidies.
It does depend from customer to customer. It is changing and improving at the moment, and it depends on how they're using their energy as well.
It's estimated households can save around $1,500 a year on power bills with rooftop solar and another $1,000 with battery storage. If Australia reaches 1 million solar batteries by 2030, households are forecast to save a total of more than $19 billion.
What solar batteries do is they time shift energy from the middle of the day when it's super cheap to make that super cheap energy available at night time when prices spike.
The purchase price is still a big barrier, with a battery system costing on average about $10,000. While there are no interest loans available, only the New South Wales and Northern Territory governments offer subsidies. That's prompted calls for the federal government to fund a national scheme to dramatically reduce the cost of batteries for consumers.
There's a saving not just for the householder, but for the whole community. That's because we're taking pressure off when electricity prices are high.
As the federal budget and election looms, this former RBA governor is warning against handing out more power bill rebates.
As governments continue to provide this household energy relief when energy prices are high, then, it's only a temporary solution.
He says a better way to shield households from energy price inflation is to make solar batteries cheaper.
Sun isn't subject to geopolitics, so it's not going to be affected by Russia invading Ukraine. If you provide households that opportunity to get that permanent low-cost source of energy rather than being dependent on fossil fuel sources of energy, which are subject to geopolitics and have been for at least 50 years, if not much longer, then that provides the opportunity for households to have energy prices not being such a major driver of inflation that they have been for many decades.
Disconnecting homes from a volatile energy market.
Major investment banks say Australia needs more, not less, renewables going head-to-head with the Coalition on Energy Policy. The coalition wants to cap renewables at 54% of the grid and pursue a nuclear industry. Labor is targeting 82%. The Clean Energy Investor Group, which includes BlackRock and Macquarie, says without renewables, household electricity bills would already be $400 higher annually. I spoke to Clean Energy Investor Group CEO, Richie Merzian. Richie Merzian, welcome to Close of Business.
Thanks for having me.
We are close to an election. Opposition energy spokesperson Ted O'Brien says the modelling on behalf of your 18 members is hyper-politicised. Is this a political document?
Not in the least. This is actually using real data we looked at really where the energy price was last year and what it would be if we didn't have renewables. This is because we constantly hear questions around the role of renewables, and we wanted to see for ourselves. The answer was it puts downward pressure on the actual price of power. If renewables weren't in the grid last year, then we would be paying up to $417 more in our power bills.
So what was the impetus behind the release of this report then? There's money ready to be deployed?
Look, the members, and I have numerous members who are both local and from offshore, are keen to invest in the clean energy transition in Australia. My membership are behind about half of the utility scale renewables in the grid, and they want to see more come online. The real question is why we don't have the policy settings in place to unleash that investment so that we can all benefit from it. Now, the market has a lot of opportunity to reform, to fast track planning, transmission. There's a whole variety of ways we could do it, but the capital is there.
And when you speak of that capital, would your members be keen to invest in nuclear?
Not a single one of my members is interested in investing in nuclear energy in Australia. And that's not because they don't have experience. Some of my members are actually invested in nuclear energy assets offshore. It's just that this does not seem like a reality in Australia because we have renewables that are providing the cheapest new generation that we can build. Nuclear is going to be a public investment, and Australians are going to ultimately pay for it, not just in terms of the build, in terms of extending coal and gas, and then also probably in higher power bills.
Well, the opposition says its plan to run renewables at the same time with nuclear will make power cheaper and it will reach net zero 1 year before Labor. Should we just wait for nuclear?
Waiting for nuclear will ultimately cost us. That's the problem. Nuclear is not just an expensive energy source that gets more expensive, it's that we have coal retiring. The majority of our coal-fired power stations will retire in the next decade. So will we be propping them up with more subsidies and extending these unreliable assets? Or will we be building the energy that's actually going to deliver cheaper power prices and ultimately decarbonise our electricity grid, which is the whole purpose of our climate commitments? That's the opportunity we have in front of us.
So your members aren't anti-nuclear as such, but they're just not keen for nuclear in Australia. You touched on it, but can you expand on why?
Look, nuclear energy at the end of the day is currently illegal. We have no frameworks to actually pursue nuclear energy. We're going to have to deal with insurance, we're going to have to deal with water, we're going to have to deal with a whole variety of things, and that's just in the actual infrastructure at a policy level, let alone the actual infrastructure when we go to building. So this is not something that we see happening in the next 20 years in Australia. By then, we'll already be at 100% renewable energy and probably beyond.
Well, the opposition has described Labor's renewables policy as all eggs in one basket. Where is the evidence coming from that renewables are cheaper?
Well, the Australian Energy Market Operator and the CSIRO produce basically the standard when it comes to assessing how costly power prices are based on different sources of generation, and it finds year on year that renewables plus storage, like batteries, is providing the cheapest new generation that we can possibly build. So we're taking the Energy Market Operator and our National Science Organisation at face value on that, but also we're seeing this as well in terms of the power prices that we're generating from our membership too.
Well, your members are big business players in investment markets and at odds with the free market party, the Coalition. Is it a case, though, that the market, not the politicians, will decide the energy future of Australia? Briefly.
There's a number of obstacles in Australia that's slowing that down. We want to see reforms to the EPBC, to the environmental assessments. We want to see a market that's designed to incentivise new builds, and so we're feeding into the federal government's review of the national market. We want to see planning approvals at a more timely scale at the state level. We want to see a whole variety of different policies because this is what will ultimately unlock more private investment, which is going to create more jobs in the regions and which is going to ultimately deliver cheaper power prices.
Richie Merzian, thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure.
After a year-long probe, the competition watchdog has found that Coles and Woolworths are among the world's most profitable supermarkets and have so much market power they barely need to compete on price. The The Australian Competition and Consumer Commission says the grocery chain's margins are sharply higher in recent years, but stops short of concluding they're gouging consumers. Business reporter Amelia Terzon has been following the story. Amelia, the year-long ACCC report into the supermarkets has delivered a raft of recommendations, but no silver bullet to push down prices.
The ACCC has recommended 20 things that it says could get competition more intense in Australia between the great supermarkets. It says that profits here in Australia are higher for the supermarkets than many other markets. It has found evidence that margins on some products, especially branded products, have been rising at Coles, Woolworths and Aldi the last 5 years, but it stops short of saying that the supermarkets have been price gouging. Some of the 20 recommendations it has includes a review of loyalty programs, which it says is confusing customers. It says that it needs more time to investigate those concerns about land banking. It's also raised a lot of concerns about the treatment of suppliers. Many of those recommendations relate to suppliers, which we heard from during the ACCC's inquiry last year.
And you spoke to the ACCC about this. What did Deputy Chair Mick Keogh have to say?
I asked him, do you have evidence of price gouging by the major supermarkets? And he said that is a very difficult thing to prove. Here's more of the Deputy Chair speaking.
We think a better way to go is to enhance competition, because that means allowing consumers to better understand pricing, to look at true value and understand where the best bang for their bucks is, and get some of that confusion that exists at the moment out of the system.
So Amelia, what is the government doing in response?
So the government, when this report was released, has said that it will put $3 million in the budget over 3 years to help out suppliers who are battling to deal with the supermarkets. I actually spoke to a supplier of milk to Coles and Woolworths. They said that that $3 million is simply not enough. The federal government does say that last year it already committed $30 million to helping the ACCC investigate the supermarket sector. It's also passed merger laws.
We accept all of those recommendations in principle, and in most of those areas we are already taking substantial steps.
The opposition says that it's tabled a members' bill to look into this area for the supermarket sector.
We believe in successful businesses, but it's got to be in competitive markets.
And that was Shadow Treasury spokesman Angus Taylor ending that report from Amelia Terzon. There are growing calls to fix the gaps in the government's workers' compensation scheme. The Fair Entitlements Guarantee, or FEG, has been placed under review after claims it's being rorted by dodgy companies. But the scheme is also facing criticism for its limitations, especially the failure to cover migrant workers. Here's Amelia Terzon again.
So this is where you were working?
Yeah. When Jasan headed into work at this restaurant, he wasn't prepared for what happened next.
There was like a notice that you can't enter the premises without permission.
An eviction notice?
Yeah, and I was like shocked.
That was 2 years ago. Documents from the restaurant's liquidation show that Jasan and his colleagues were owed $230,000 in pay, annual leave and superannuation.
How much money were you owed by the business?
It's like nearly 7,000, and then super.
Did you think you'd get that money?
I thought I would get that one because I have complained to Fair Work and then FEG.
FEG, or FEG, is a government scheme of last resort that pays out missing entitlements.
The FEG scheme is a really crucial safety net for workers when the company that they work for goes belly up.
Now the government is reviewing FEG after claims that it's being rorted. Data shows that of the $200 million paid out to workers under the scheme last financial year, almost half of these came out of company collapses with question marks over them.
Companies that were deliberately restructured in a way to avoid paying those entitlements. What we want to do is weed out the rogue players in company transactions and insolvencies to stop them from pushing their responsibilities onto taxpayers generally.
The review is also prompting calls for change. This tradie, who doesn't want to be named, got a payout from FEG 2 years ago when the builder that he worked for collapsed.
So what did it mean for you that FEG paid out your annual leave?
It was very comforting. It was very good the way they handled it.
Along with more than 100 colleagues, he was also owed superannuation, but FEG won't cover that.
How did you feel when the super wasn't covered?
Well, that was a little bit deflating. I consider this wage theft. We're entitled to that. We've worked our time. We've worked for the company.
When Jasan applied to FEG, he received nothing, while his 9 colleagues got $67,000 between them. That's because, unlike them, he is not a permanent resident or an Australian citizen.
I was totally depressed because I was working full-time, paying tax. They think I'm outsiders. So I feel more sad and terrible. Hi.
There you go. Please take a seat.
A migrant workers' rights legal centre that's trying to help Jasan says the scheme needs to cover people on working visas.
The fair entitlements guarantee is neither fair nor a guarantee for the more than 1.5 million workers on temporary visas in this country.
As well as protections for migrants, Matt Kunkel is lobbying for super to be added too.
What we see here quite often is that superannuation is not paid, and it's not paid for a really long time.
Ahead of the federal election, Labor says that it's hearing calls about adding superannuation to FEG, but that migrants aren't a current focus. The Coalition says they'll wait for the outcome of this review, while the Greens say that both super and migrant should be added to the scheme.
This tradie agrees.
And you got this payout because you're an Australian citizen. Migrants who work for collapsed companies don't get these payouts. How do you feel about that?
I think that's not a very good situation because that person's actually a worker. He's actually worked for his entitlements and he's paid tax.
As an election looms, the FEG review might drag out all year.
A new report by the competition watchdog has found Australia's 4 biggest airports landed record revenue last year, up by nearly 25% to $2.6 billion. The report also found airports had 60% profit margins on their parking, as former ACCC chairman Professor Graham Samuel, who now chairs lobby group Airlines for Australia and New Zealand, told the business.
I'll use the expression price gouging. See, these airports are monopolists in every city, and therefore they can charge whatever they like as monopolists. They can provide whatever level of service that they deem appropriate as monopolists. And you'll notice as you go into airports that the retail areas are glittery and full of gloss because that suits their purpose to raise revenue. But the other areas where the passengers mostly have to wait for aircraft and the like are pretty shabby for the most part. And that just reflects the attitude of airports that we are monopolies, you've got no choice. You've got to come here to land your planes, airlines. You've got to come here to board your planes and disembark passengers. So just take it. What it says to passengers that park their cars at the airport is that you, for every dollar you pay in car parking fees, 60, and in some cases it's as high as 70 cents, will go to the airports as operating margin. This is just extraordinary stuff. I've been in the wrong business all these years. I just can't figure it out, how airports can get away with it. That's not true. I can figure it out. When you are a monopolist and you're subject to very little regulatory oversight or very little regulatory discipline, then you can well expect that monopolists will do this. They'll charge whatever they like, and the charges are not just on the airlines, but they're on every single passenger that enters the airport site.
The loss of more than 50,000 jobs in February came as a shock. The consensus expectation had been for jobs growth. But despite the turn, the unemployment rate held steady. As Rachel Clayton reports, the data adds to the case for a May rate cut.
In the heart of Australia's dining scene, business is sizzling. But behind the kitchen doors, finding the right staff is proving harder than ever.
We have a lot of applications come through weekly for jobs for front of house and for kitchen and things like that, but it doesn't mean that they're all hireable.
6,000 people applied for a recent job ad, but in the cutthroat restaurant world, Hayley Mitchell wants candidates who can handle the heat.
Service, please. They want work-life balance, they want career growth from the employee's side. You know, hospitality hasn't changed and the work hours haven't changed. So that finding that real balance in terms of the people that you bring on board to be able to really grow your business and have the right people in the right places can be challenging.
And it could become even harder. In February, almost 53,000 jobs were lost from the economy. There were 11,200 fewer people out of work, with many deciding to leave the workforce, largely to retire, pushing the participation rate down. That kept unemployment steady at 4.1%.
Baby boomers will choose to retire when their financial circumstances allow them to do so, but we are still seeing many new jobs created for younger people.
Mariana Stacey has been looking for work since October.
I was competing with 200 applicants or, 400 applicants in each position. I was looking in LinkedIn, Seek, Indeed, and I felt like I was really behind or I wasn't really getting noticed.
You're more fulfilled in yourself.
So she turned to non-profit Fitted for Work, an organisation that helps women get into the workforce, and landed her a job.
We're certainly seeing that jobs and the jobs market is a little bit tighter, but that's where you need the extra help. That's where you need someone to support you through that process.
I feel like I got the job I wanted.
And more people are getting the hours they want, with the underemployment rate falling to the equal lowest level since the global financial crisis.
What many people will want to know is, what does this mean for rates? 3 of the big 4 banks are forecasting a cut in May, but that will depend on the next round of quarterly inflation figures due to be released next month.
The job market overall has been pretty strong, and so the February result is somewhat of an outlier compared to what we have seen over the past 6 months or so. So the RBA won't be too concerned about that result unless we see further weakness in the month of March.
May is still a live meeting with a possibility of a rate cut, but on the balance of data right now, we don't think there'll be a rate cut in May either. Now, the big risk to that forecast is around global uncertainty.
We're going to 75.
For restaurateur Hayley Mitchell, fewer workers in the workforce means a smaller pool of candidates to choose from.
Across the board, our friends in the city, everyone is advertising or constantly recruiting for the right person.
Businesses adapting to a more competitive market.
The share market bounced back from 4 weeks of losses to book a reasonable gain. The ASX 200 and the All Ords ending the trading week up 1.8% each. Independent economic futurist Evan Lucas joined me. Evan Lucas, supermarkets were among the best performers on the market on Friday, escaping the ACCC inquiry basically without penalty.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the best way to sort of finish it up, is that it's not even about penalty, it's the fact that they'd been telling us for the last year and a half that they weren't price gouging, and that's what the report told us. And even though the report itself was rather scathing about how much profit they're making, overall, from a market perspective, there wasn't anything there that would really suggest they need to change their overall ways. Coles has somewhat come out and said that it wants to adopt some form of oversight board and that they want Woolies to come on top of it. But from, again, the perspective of the market, this is what A was expected, B it's now a confirmation, and it also shows they can get on with doing the job they have been doing for the last 20 years, which is being the biggest duopoly we have in this country.
Well, the broader Australian share market snapped 4 weeks of losses, which had been sparked by Trump's tariffs and uncertainty, but that uncertainty hasn't gone away, has it?
No, it hasn't, and I find this week very interesting because we are now, 8 days away or thereabouts from the release of what could be round 2 and the reciprocal tariffs that are coming on the magical April 2nd date. Whether it's then or a little bit later, it doesn't matter. That, for me, I think is where the uncertainty is going to be. That, what size, how, who, what, is all the questions that mean that, yes, this week was reasonable. It's not surprising we needed a bounce after having such a savage sell-off over the last month. But I am still very, very much of the view that April will define where we currently sit.
Well, a weak jobs report in Australia for the month of February lifted the chances of a May rate cut. On the day, at least, market expectations rose to about a 74% chance of a cut in May. What's your view?
So May would still be a probability, not the lock probability. What we still won't get by the May numbers is that we won't have the first quarter CPI data and GDP figures. In fact, if they're going to wait to July, because then they'll actually get more information around the second quarter of this calendar year. And most would forecast that if they are going to do it, after what was said at the February RBA meeting, July still looks more the likely time to see it. Not surprised to see that tick up, but again, you can explain away the employment numbers. Most of those that actually lost jobs weren't that they actually were fired or lost their jobs, they retired. And I think that needs to be pointed out. It was around retirement why we saw a fall in the unemployment rate and those that were in work to where we were before. It's not actually around any other major structural change.
The only certainty for markets, it seems, is uncertainty in the era of Trump. Who are the winners and losers in this environment, do you think?
I think we need to start with the losers straight off, because it's not just looking into Australia or looking to the globe and what the global impacts have been around the tariff scenarios they've had. They can look domestically. I mean, the numbers that came out from Nike this week are astounding, and it's not about just the numbers they've just had, it's their forecast into the future. The fact that they are telling you very clearly that they are directly impacted by the Trump administration's current policies, that it will have a savage effect on sales, revenue, numbers, and also margins, is a great beacon of what the uncertainty is going to bring. Those that benefit, it's gold miners. I mean, they're the only ones you can really point to. Even those in crypto space haven't done anything near the levels that they were expecting. So for me, apparel and those basically fully exposed to really high cost manufacturing and low cost turnovers, and then things like gold are the winners and losers from this part.
Evan Lucas, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Alicia.
And that's all from Close of Business. I'm Alicia Barry. Thanks for watching.